Navigating the legal world can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. The Indiana Lawyer Podcast is here to help you understand the laws impacting your life, work, and community. Whether you're a legal professional, a business owner, or someone who wants to know how Indiana law shapes the world around you, this podcast is for you. Hosted by Alexa Shrake, a passionate legal reporter, we're here to bring you clarity and insights like no one else can. This podcast is brought to you by Taft, today's modern law firm.
For over 150 years since the ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868, people born in the United States have been citizens. A January 20th executive order is attempting to change that. I sat down with Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law professor Gerard Magliocca to talk about President Donald Trump's executive order to change the 14th Amendment on birthright citizenship. 3 federal judges have blocked the order. But before we get into it, let's hear from our sponsor, Taft.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
On March 13th, after the recording of this episode, Acting Solicitor General Sarah Harris asked the U.S. Supreme Court to partially block the 3 orders, so the government would only be barred from enforcing them against the individuals named in the complaints, the members of the groups challenging the order, and the residents of the states challenging the order. So far, briefs have been filed in the case. Since President Donald Trump's first day, he has signed a flurry of executive orders on a wide variety of issues, but with a spotlight on immigration. So to start, Gerard, can you give us some background on the 14th Amendment?
Sure, Alexa, thanks for inviting me. The 14th Amendment was ratified after the Civil War to settle certain specific issues that came out of the war, but also to establish some principles that were designed to prevent the kinds of wrongs that had led to the war in the minds of the people in the North who had led the victory. And one of those was the Dred Scott decision of the Supreme Court from 1857, which said that blacks could not be citizens of the United States. So the 14th Amendment was partly designed to overrule that decision and establish as our constitutional law the common law of England and the United States, which had said that anyone born here under the authority of the United States government was a citizen. So that, of course, would have included blacks and overruled what Dred Scott had said. So that's the kind of background to why the 14th Amendment was there with respect to birthright citizenship.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so there's been a lot happening since January, and it can definitely be hard to follow all of the executive orders, all of the judges stopping, just all of those things. I feel like I'm getting notifications constantly from New York Times. Another judge did this. So can you kind of walk me through the efforts that the administration is taking to undo birthright citizenship?
Yes. So the administration on its first day issued an executive order that says that the children born here to people who are here illegally and children who are born here to people on a student visa or people who are on a tourist visa in a certain sense will not be considered citizens of the United States. And therefore, that means, for example, they wouldn't be able to get a passport or they wouldn't be able to get other benefits that are associated with citizenship. So the executive order was issued. It was almost immediately put on hold by a couple of federal district courts on the grounds that it is probably unconstitutional, and now the litigation is underway.
This would probably be figured out in the litigation, but this kind of made me think of it. What would happen to somebody if they were born here and there isn't birthright citizenship?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's not clear when that would come up, because if you have a baby, it's not clear at what point you would really seek to get a passport or seek to get anything that a baby who's a citizen would be entitled to. Obviously, babies aren't voting or serving on juries and that sort of thing. So it might be some years before it would really make a difference to anyone. But there are people who would want a passport, for example, for traveling reasons. It's on hold right now. Therefore, there's really no change in the prior process, which would simply be to show a birth certificate that you were born here and that, therefore, you're entitled to a passport and all of these things. The only change would occur if the courts ultimately were to uphold the validity of the executive order.
And, like we've said, several judges have halted this executive order. What is next in this process?
Well, those orders are on appeal. There's a case pending in the Ninth Circuit, a case pending in the First Circuit. So I think there will be argument this summer before panels of those courts. So we're probably looking at a Supreme Court case either early in 2026 or perhaps late in 2026, depending on exactly how rapidly the appellate panels reach their conclusions. So we're still at least a year away from a Supreme Court decision on this question, but that's where it'll end up.
Do you know the last time America saw a president propose a constitutional change like this one?
No president has made an order related to birthright citizenship since the ratification of the 14th Amendment that I'm aware of. And it's a little hard. You can certainly think of presidential orders, especially in wartime, that make major changes. Think of, for example, Franklin Roosevelt's order interning Japanese Americans during World War II. But in recent times, I don't know that there's one that is comparable. I mean, I guess there were things done during COVID that were both by presidents and governors, right, that were pretty exceptional. And some people might look at those as being comparable, but nothing with respect to citizenship.
Are there other avenues that President Trump can take to change the 14th Amendment other than an executive order?
No. Now, there is the possibility that Congress would pass a law that would purport to change the definition of birthright citizenship. But first of all, there's no indication they're going to do that. Secondly, that also would be unconstitutional in my view. But there's no other executive option for the president if the order is held to be invalid.
Mm-hmm. What do you expect will happen with this executive order?
Well, I think it will be struck down by the courts, and I think in the Supreme Court you're going to see at least 6 or 7 votes to find it invalid. First, there is a question as to whether the president can do this on his own. Where is the presidential authority to do that? But even if you assume that he does have the authority on his own to act, it's not an authority that anyone in the federal government possesses, because the 14th Amendment clearly says that birthright citizenship belongs to all except for very small exceptions that don't apply to the categories of people that have been identified in the executive order.
Excellent. Well, that'll do for this week's interview. Gerard, thank you again for joining me today. To our listeners, head over to theindianalawyer.com to read more legal news. Until next time, you can listen to past episodes wherever you get your podcasts.